My father kicked me out of the house. My mother said I had gone insane, and my classmates said I had ruined my reputation. All of that, just for entering a mosque, hearing a call, and prostrating for the first time in my life before a God I had denied since childhood. I wasn't in crisis. I wasn't manipulated. I wasn't lost. On the contrary, it was the first time in my entire existence that I felt like I was truly standing, even though my face was on the ground. And in that moment, in that gesture, in that silence, I realized I no longer needed proof, because the truth, when it reaches you, doesn't need to explain itself. My name is Riku Yamazaki. I'm 38 years old and was born in Nara, Japan, a country where most people live without religion, without prayer, without even thinking about God. I grew up believing everything came down to logic, effort, and science. But one day a simple question disarmed me. Who organized all of this? The answer I found didn't come from a temple. It came from the Quran. Before continuing with the testimony, write in the comments where you're watching this video from. I want to know how far the Word of God is reaching, and I want you to know, if you're hearing this now, it's not by accident. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click the button and follow each testimony. Because sometimes one story awakens what years of silence couldn't touch. Even after everything I read, I still had doubts. It wasn't a matter of logic. It was the fear of admitting that maybe I'd been wrong my whole life. In Japan, no one talks about God. Religion isn't debated. Spirituality is treated like folklore, like cultural heritage. So I kept that interest to myself. Until one September afternoon, I gathered the courage and walked to the mosque in Kobe. I remember it like it was today. I took off my shoes, took a deep breath and stepped in. The smell of the carpet, the soft light coming through the windows, and most of all, the silence. It was a different kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was a silence full of presence. But what truly unsettled me wasn't the architecture or the atmosphere. It was the people, men from countries I couldn't even pronounce, all gathered speaking different languages, but making the same prayer, shoulder to shoulder. No one looked at me strangely. No one asked why I was there. They just smiled and made room. One of them offered me a copy of the Quran in Japanese. Another taught me how to wash my hands for prayer. I said I wasn't Muslim. He replied, "You came in, that's already the first step." In that moment, something changed. It wasn't a light from the sky. It was something deeper. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something that didn't demand performance, just sincerity. I didn't need to hide behind titles, inherited religion, or theories. There, kneeling on the carpet, I understood that God didn't need to be seen with the eyes, because he had already revealed himself to my heart. That same day, without planning, without rehearsing, without anyone pressuring me, I declared my faith. In poorly spoken Arabic, with trembling hands and tearful eyes, I said, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah." And everything around me seemed to make sense. It was the day I entered the mosque and left as a new person. That night, when I returned home, I looked at my own reflection in the mirror as if I were seeing a stranger. My body was the same, but my soul finally seemed to have found a home. But not everyone around me was ready to witness that transformation. For 3 months, I lived a double life. On the outside, I was still the same discreet Japanese son, the diligent student, the young atheist who never caused conflict. But inside, everything had changed. I was already performing the 5 daily prayers in silence, in secret. I kept the Quran in the back of a drawer. And I learned to smile as if nothing had happened, while in truth, my heart burned with the desire to share the truth that had set me free. It wasn't shame. It was fear. In Japan, religion isn't a common topic. And Islam, for many, is still a synonym for misunderstanding. My parents were skeptics. They only believed in what science could prove. My classmates saw any form of faith as a kind of emotional weakness. How could I explain that for the first time in my life I felt whole? What I didn't know was that this secret wouldn't stay hidden for long, and that the revelation wouldn't come through a calm conversation, but through an accident. It was a winter afternoon. I had just left the mosque, holding a pack of halal noodles in my hands. I was crossing the street, distracted, when a car turned the corner too fast. I didn't have time to run. I felt the impact, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in an ambulance, and it was there, amidst sirens and questions, that my family found out where I had been, and why. The police called my father. They informed him that his son had been hit by a car in front of a mosque. That was the last straw. He didn't want details. He didn't want explanations. He just said one sentence as hard as stone. When you're discharged from the hospital, don't come back home. On the hospital stretcher, with my body injured and my head throbbing, I was still trying to understand if all of it was real. The accident hurt, but the real pain began when I was discharged. Because what awaited me outside wasn't a hug, it was a sentence. I arrived home with slow steps, leaning on a borrowed cane, but I didn't even have to go inside. My father was already waiting at the gate with a stern expression and a black plastic bag in his hand. Inside were my clothes, a few books, my study notebook, and my university ID. No words, no chance for explanation, just the cold gesture of someone who had already decided I was no longer welcome. My mother tried to intervene. She hesitated for a second, her eyes filled with tears, but didn't have the strength to go against him. And I understood. That house was built on silence, rules, and fear of scandal. The simple idea of a son converted to Islam was too much for the neighbors, for the extended family, for his pride. For my father, it was better to cast me out than to face the shame of having a Muslim under the same roof. That day, I didn't cry. I simply walked to the nearest train station. I carried a suitcase and a heart in pieces. I spent the night on a park bench, with the cold wind reminding me that now, more than ever, my faith would have to be my shelter. It was there, alone, that I made the Isha prayer in a low voice. And in that moment I understood Islam never promised ease. It promised truth. It promised purpose. And that I had already found. The next day I was welcomed by a brother from the Muslim community, a simple man from Indonesia who offered me shelter without knowing me. We shared the same room for months. He taught me how to cook halal food, gave me my first prayer rug, and more than that, treated me like family. For the first time, I understood what Ummah means, the brotherhood between those who believe. Even without blood ties, I had found a new home. But still, inside me, one question wouldn't let me rest. Would my parents ever understand? Months passed. The pain became a scar, the longing, a constant prayer. And I kept moving forward, learning, praying, seeking wisdom. But deep down, something still bothered me. My silence at home. I had never told the truth, never clearly said why I was at the mosque the day of the accident. And one day, I decided I needed to make it right. I chose a Sunday afternoon. I knew my father would be out, walking with his friends, as he did every week. I took only a small bag with me and wore simple clothes, a white shirt, dark pants, and a discreet kufi. I didn't want to confront anyone. I just wanted to be heard. I knocked on the door with a racing heart. My mother answered. She froze for a few seconds, looked me up and down as if trying to confirm it was really me. And before she could say anything, I took off my shoes, walked in slowly, and said only, "I'm not here to argue. I just want to tell you the truth." We sat in the kitchen. The kettle was still warm on the stove. And there, over sips of green tea, I told her everything. How I discovered Islam. How I felt peace for the first time when I heard the call to prayer. How that book in Arabic, which I didn't understand at first, seemed to speak to my soul. I spoke about my prayers, about fasting, about the brotherhood I had found. I talked about how being Muslim hadn't taken me away from good values. On the contrary, it made me respect family, honesty, and justice even more. She listened to everything in silence, didn't interrupt. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "You're different, but it's not a bad thing. It's a different presence in your eyes." That day, she didn't hug me, but she didn't send me away either. She let me finish my tea, put away the cup without rush, and before I left, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Come visit again, but come when your father isn't home." That was enough, a beginning, a small crack in the wall that had separated us. And in that quiet restraint, I understood. Allah was already working in their hearts. A few days after that conversation with my mother, I started reflecting on something I hadn't yet put into words. Yes, my faith had changed. My view of God, of the world, of death. Everything was different now. But there was something else. Something more intimate, deeper than any debate about religion. Before Islam, I was a man without an emotional compass. Extremely shy, insecure about everything, and marked by invisible scars from a silently painful youth. I was a victim of bullying from elementary school on. They called me weird, strange. They laughed at my soft voice, the way I walked, my grades that were too high. I never had close friends. I was never invited to parties. I grew up inside myself, hidden, suffocated, and often ashamed of existing. Even in nursing school, where I had hoped for a new beginning, I felt out of place. My classmates avoided me. The laughter in the hallways continued, and I began to believe that maybe the problem really was me. I even thought it might be better not to be here anymore, not to have to feel this constant weight of not belonging. But after the Shahada, something began to move inside me. I started to see my worth not through other people's eyes, but through the eyes of the one who created me. The Quran said that Allah knows even what is hidden in the hearts. And that gave me relief. For the first time in my life, someone divine knew me completely and still accepted me. I started looking in the mirror without shame, walking down the street without fear of people's stares. I learned to smile sincerely. I even learned to forgive those who had hurt me, because the true miracle of Islam, in my case, wasn't just a change of faith. It was the rebirth of an identity, a healed heart, a mind at peace, and a soul that finally knew where it was going. After rediscovering my own dignity as a human being, something new emerged in my heart. A desire that wasn't ambition. It was responsibility. Now that I had found the truth, I couldn't keep it to myself. I wanted to understand more. I wanted to be able to explain it clearly. I wanted to help other Japanese people like me, who lived in spiritual silence without even realizing it. At that time, the Imam of the Kobe Mosque was Indian. He spoke English and Arabic, but not Japanese, and I noticed that many other new converts were thirsty like me, but left the sermons with more questions than answers. The content was good, but the language barrier was harsh, and something inside me whispered, "You can be the bridge." I kept helping as a volunteer at the mosque, translating the basics, answering questions from curious visitors, offering tea to those who peeked in suspiciously. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to teach. I wanted to have a foundation. I wanted to know Islam beyond the surface. That's when I learned about the Islamic University of Medina, one of the most respected in the world. I thought, a Japanese man studying theology in Arabic, is that crazy? But instead of laughing at the idea, I made dua, and Allah responded. My family, though still unsure, didn't oppose. I prepared everything with what little I had, left nursing behind, and a few months later, I set foot on Saudi soil. The heat overwhelmed me. The language was a maze, and I was the only Japanese student in the room, but I had something no one could take from me: purpose. I studied Arabic with determination, slept late, reviewed my books, attended extra classes. And when I was accepted into the Sharia program, I cried alone in my room. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood I was exactly where I was meant to be. Years later, in July 2024, I received my diploma. I was only the 5th Japanese person in history to graduate from Medina, and more important than the title was what it represented. A new beginning, not only for me, but for everyone who would one day hear my story. Returning to Japan felt like revisiting my origin, but with a new perspective. The same streets, the same shops, the same train station. But now, something in me had changed. The silence that once oppressed me now nourished me. I wasn't returning as the confused 21-year-old, but as a man with spiritual roots and a clear purpose. The same Kobe mosque where 10 years earlier I had prostrated for the first time now welcomed me as a spiritual leader. I became the imam of the house that had witnessed my spiritual birth. It was as if Allah were saying to me, "Return to where the first tear fell. That's where your mission begins." In the first few days, I sat in silence for long minutes inside the empty prayer hall. The walls seemed to recognize me. Every detail of the carpet, every window, every book on the shelves brought me back to the day I first walked in, not even knowing how to behave. This time, I wasn't just a listener. I was the voice, the reference. And finally, in Japanese, for the first time, many brothers and sisters could hear a khutbah clearly without depending on fragmented translations or words that failed to reach the heart. Many came to me in tears. Some said, "I've been waiting for this for years. I finally understood what Islam really teaches." Others hugged me in silence. And some, just like I once was, simply sat in the back, listening with frightened but attentive eyes. There were hard days too. Criticism, doubts, responsibilities, but something sustained me. I wasn't there by personal choice. I was there in response. Every word I spoke was the fruit of prayer, effort, and divine mercy. Seeing my father years later walk into the mosque for the first time without me ever inviting him was the confirmation that Allah not only transforms hearts, He writes stories with plot twists no human script could plan. My father's visit was the first visible miracle, but it wasn't the last. After that day, when my father quietly walked through the doors of the mosque, something changed, not only in my home, but in the community as well. He didn't ask questions. He didn't give speeches. He just observed. And at the end of the prayer, he said to me, "Now I understand why you chose to stay." The following week, a young Japanese man approached me. He had seen a video of my testimony and said it had left him restless for days. "You told my story before even knowing me," he said with teary eyes. "Without my knowing, my voice had already become an instrument." Others came, some curious, others already broken by life. Many of them, like I once was, carried the weight of a faith inherited through culture, but never truly lived. And they found in Islam not a foreign religion, but an intimate, universal answer. I started receiving messages every week. People from Hokkaido to Okinawa wanted to know more, ask questions, seek guidance, and most surprising of all, many weren't even Muslim. They were atheists, agnostics, ex-Buddhists, young people in crisis, and elderly folks in search of peace. I realized then that someone's testimony is not just about their story, but about the echo it can create in other lives. Faith is not silent. When it's born genuine, it finds ways to spread, even if it's through a screen, a word, a glance. I never planned to be an imam. I never planned to be a reference. But when Allah decides to use someone, He also prepares the ears that need to hear. And amidst all of this, I realized something even deeper. The true victory wasn't in convincing others to follow my journey, but in seeing them find for themselves the path to the one God. Because Islam doesn't conquer by force, it transforms by example. For many years, I thought my life had no purpose. I grew up in a country where spirituality seemed buried beneath routines, traditions, and silence. I never imagined that one day it would be faith itself that would give meaning to every pain, every rejection, every new beginning. Today, when I walk through the hallways of the mosque where it all began, I look back and see that nothing was by chance. Not the accident, not being kicked out of my home, not the nights I cried without understanding who I was. Every detail was part of a silent and sacred calling. And if you're watching this video up to this point, maybe it's not by chance either. Write in the comments where you're listening to this testimony from. I want to know how far this message is reaching, because it's not mine. It belongs to the God who guides those who open up, who transforms those who surrender, and who never abandons those who truly seek him. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't share religion as imposition, but as lived truth. And maybe amidst so much noise, this is what you've been searching for, something that finally makes sense. May Allah guide your steps, and may peace be upon you.